This is going to be an attempt to put together some experiences from adolescent work with adolescents, and the adolescent parts of ourselves. I'll begin with a description of two youngsters. Rosie comes weekly to a child guidance clinic. Does it? Okay. She's punctual, she's scowling, she looks like an enormous angry baby. She's of Caribbean origin. She's big, overweight, untidy, angrily against everyone. They is all trash, she says. I've got no friends, I don't want no thieving friends. She sits in front of me, unsmiling, telling me of her dissatisfactions. She never weeps. Her bad knee aches. She can't be bothered to go back to the no-good rheumatologist. She can't diet or keep the dietitian's diet when them stupid parents buy all wrong food what don't suit them, nor me, and they is eating themselves to death. Her obesity makes her leg worse, so she can't play stupid games in school. She bedwets. She's going to fail all her exams. She says she don't care, the teachers never did nothing for her. Her invisible spots and her dry skin trouble her. The dermatologist won't help. The stuff she needs costs too much. Everything costs too much. Her 50-pound trainers are getting old. Her 90-pound leather jacket needs cleaning. Her specs don't help her sight. They're too cheap. Mum won't pay. All she cares is to save to go home, says Rosie. It ain't my home. I belong here. But home here is hell, as described by Rosie. Mum and Dad is sick. They are, actually. But both have been schizophrenic and had bad breakdowns. They cause it themselves. She drinks too much, he always in fights. My room is damp and there's rats. Suggestions of a cat get nowhere. Don't want them, just messing everywhere. Rosie wants to leave home and leave her part of London. There's no good here, trouble only. The social worker, the educational welfare worker, and me are all trying hard. 3 hostels have been offered. They've been turned down. Too small, too noisy, too flash. She usually comes to see me with something she's bought. A lampshade or a cushion for the room that we will never find her, she says. She needs lots of money, so she don't have no cheap stuff, only good stuff. She has very grand ideas and much ambition. She's massively contemptuous of all of us, but she can use help. If she doesn't turn up to see me, I know it's because there's an exam or an interview with one of her other many helpers. So when she doesn't come, I know she's well. Katrina also attends a clinic weekly. Looking out the window, I can see her walk down the street, stand at the crossing, a composed, dignified youngster with a calm, sometimes beautiful face. Her unusually attractive school uniform looks on her like smart Sloane Ranger wear. She's usually late, but she looks calm and unruffled. The reason she's late is that depression slows her up in the morning. And further, it takes a very long time to achieve the perfect appearance. She will even wash and gel her beautifully cut dark hair before coming to the clinic, while worrying about being late. She comes in and sits facing me in calm silence, answering 1 or 2 comments by an elegant, indifferent shrug. Says the week has been okay. Shortly, her face contorts and painful tears begin to flow. Why can't I be like everyone else? Everyone else does their homework on time. Everyone else has lots of friends. Everyone else loves their parents and their little sister and is loved in return. Everyone else helps at home. Everyone else can forgive injuries. Everyone else will get a good job, have a good life. Everyone else looks good. Katrina knows she should be like that. She even wants to be like that, but she can't make herself unless the rare mood comes. Why can't I, she weeps, accepting the box of tissues I offer like a small child would take them. I'm so stupid, I'm boring, I'm ugly. At school, the exhausted teachers keep trying encouragement, indulgence, and attentions alternately. At home, mother nags or sobs, gives dire warnings about the future, and worries over her daughter's infuriating laziness, her lack of feeling, and her rudeness to her father. He has given up trying to tease or joke with her, carries on in stoic silence with occasional cruel outbursts and threatened violence. He says when she's finished school, either she will have to leave or he will. She has said she'll take a knife to him. She secretly fears that one day she'll make him so mad that he'll come into her room at night and stab her. She has nightmares about this. Her hate focuses on the way he treats his family, his hello girls to wife as well as daughters when he comes in, his refusal to do any household chores, his clumsy attempts to please her by teasing or by tricks, the way he eats with his mouth open, his hypocrisy with strangers and visitors. I know he's not a bad father, but I hate him. He's like a child. She hates children and babies, unlike everybody else. But she says, I wouldn't want to run away or be dead. She hates herself. In the tube in the mornings, this rather beautiful child can't look at the windows of the tube in case she sees her ugly face reflected in the glass of the windows. Thank God there is another Katrina. At night in her room, she puts on makeup, sings and acts in front of her mirror. She'd love to be an actress. She knows she's good at acting. So does her drama teacher, who never sees any proof these days and is furiously frustrated with the girl. Out of school at times, she joins ballet or gym classes, shines briefly, and drops out. In summer, she goes with the parents to their country of origin, where she's given more freedom. They all feel more safe. She makes friends, and she's really happy. The screaming rows indoors cease. The nightmares and dreams of father's rage stop. Her feminist fury with him stops, and so does her intolerance of her mother's incessant housework. What she can't do is to keep these bits and pieces together. She can't recall the happiness or the good behavior in the bad times, nor can she anticipate any comfort from her therapy, though she often leaves the room smiling. If she doesn't come to the clinic, I know it is because she feels too ill to come and too bad to face me. So, Katrina, perfectly turned out, a carefully composed presentation with inside a despairing, helpless, frightened chaos and rebellion. Rosie, a powerful, even threatening, determined survivor, but in the image of a messy, hypochondriacal, big, moody baby. Neither with any consistent insight, both moderately pathological. This splitting is perhaps the most common characteristic of adolescents who are, as Erickson pointed out, engaged in the task of finding a consistent, acceptable identity for themselves. Now, Jung, all his working life, was fascinated with this theme of opposites and splits in the psyche, and also the existence in normal as well as abnormal people of dual personalities. And we know it all from our own experience in minor ways. Take tonight's lecture. When I first saw the printed advertisement for the lecture, which Jane has already apologized for, I was momentarily horrified to see the word recurrent, spelled as it was. Now, my number one personality observed this, regretted it, was irritated, and then noted, too late to correct, then perhaps no one will notice, then, well, it's near enough for people not to misunderstand, though they may be critical. However, my number two personality reacted very differently. Firstly, I, exaggerated the mistake, reading red currant, the fruit for recurrent, and then it took off completely by way of first a recollection of the title of a novel that I have enjoyed about adolescence, and some of you may know, by a favorite author of mine, The Green Gage Summer by Rumer Godden. And I then began spontaneously, not plannedly, to compose a lecture called The Red Currant Experience of Adolescence. Highly colored, group-orientated, well, adolescents do hang around in gangs, and tart, if not actually sour. So this was a progression, not deliberate, via misperception, withdrawal to comfort and isolation. Reading's always been a good escape for me. And finally, a rather edgy creativity. However, that's not the lecture that you're going to hear. But I do hope my transcendent function will be strong enough to provide sufficient subjectivity to redeem this talk from merely being a parroting of the work of others. However, to go to the work of others, I'd like to give you some history of this concept of dual aspects in Jung's life and in his work. Non-Jungians among you will be able to translate fairly easily into the other languages of splitting, displacements, introjects and inner objects, deintegrates and so on, familiar from the work of Freud, Klein, and Michael Fordham's school of Jungian child analysis. Jung wrote a great deal about adolescence. In contrast, in England at least, few Jungians have published work directly concerned with this age, though I think in the forthcoming volume, the second volume by the child analyst, the subject is going to be dealt with. In the past, in England, Ruth Campbell and Mildred Marshak have written directly about adolescence, and of course other people have referred to it in archetypal terms, such as references to the puer aeternus. In Jung's own writings, the first direct reference is actually in the first volume of the collected works in 1902. And this is a very interesting description of a young girl called S.W. In the writing. She wasn't a patient. It isn't quite clear to me whether she was nobody's patient or simply not a patient of his. But I think she just wasn't a patient. She was a 15-year-old, and she was referred to by Jung as hysteric with epileptoid features. At times she showed hallucinations, sleepwalking, and mood swings. She also functioned, however, as a psychic medium in much demand, displaying automatisms, trances, and a dual personality. The interesting thing is that in his final reference to this young woman, she had become, quote, an industrious and dutiful person who does her work with skill and zeal to the satisfaction of all concerned, and her character is much improved, a fate that I hope Rosie and Katrina will undergo in not too far distant future. But apparently this has happened in the collected works in the absence of formal treatment. Now, we might think of this sort of youngster as a borderline personality marked in adolescence by a breakdown with psychotic features and a spontaneous recovery. Such states aren't unusual in adolescence, and indeed they make us rightly wary of hard prognoses at this age group, even when youngsters show considerable pathology. The fact that her gross pathology found an acceptable outlet as a medium, rather than being treated as a patient, might even have had a bearing on the outcome. Anyway, to Jung, she represented an early encounter with the layers of consciousness, with personal consciousness, subconscious, and the collective unconscious from which some of her more striking visions arose. He was to return to this theme of dual consciousness over and over. In volume 17, he describes several cases, male and female, ranging from 9 to 20, with similar defects in the ego and the emergence of deep unconscious material both in waking behavior and in dreams. In these later writings, about 1924, he had begun to see as a causal factor the role of intrusive parents whose behavior forced the adolescent to function at two levels: one, an everyday adaptation to parental expectations and projections, the other, a more hidden self, liable to disruptive breakthroughs in times of stress and not under the conscious control of the individual. These clinical cases, however, were not Jung's earliest encounter with this phenomenon. His interest was in part a conscious intellectual effort to understand events and personality traits which he had faced both in his parents and in himself, as he describes in Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. He had, as a child, noted in his mother what he described as a number 1 and a number 2 personality. Number 1 personality was a friendly, warm, earthy, everyday woman. The other was stranger, more eerie, an early type of the wise old woman or witch figure, omniscient and unpredictable. In his father, he also discerned a split between the formal, conventional clergyman and an inner emptiness, as it seemed to Jung, which caused him pity and disappointment. More importantly, in his own middle life, following his disillusionment with Freud, a father figure if there ever was one, he had a near breakdown and was forced to a confrontation with his own partly recognized number 2 personality, by then a powerful and chaotic torrent of impersonal forces which he dealt with by means of personalizing them as archetypal figures. He gave these figures names: Salome, Elijah, Philemon, who was a guru-like figure who interpreted and seemed to control the other fragmented elements, and a female personality, something like his vision of his mother's number 2 personality, rather prophetic and gnomic, whom he gave the term anima to. Now, it's also worth noting in current psychiatric thinking that in the earlier period, in his teens, when he was coming to terms with disillusionment with his own father, he was perceived to be and commented as being depressed by his mother. Jung himself describes this experience as being brooding. And after the break with Freud, he again describes himself as going through what he called inner uncertainty. But it's also noteworthy that he withdrew socially, gave up his lectureship in the university, and much of his hospital work. So perhaps 2 outbreaks of depression. A contemporary Jungian analyst, Joe Redfern, has described a similar phenomenon in lesser degree. He, in the foreword to his book Myself and Many Selves, has written about periods of irritable snappiness and withdrawal, for which he rather nicely apologizes to his family, but which accompany internal experiences of imaginative activity. He calls this creative suffering. Again, I hope that's what my 2 adolescents are going through. Now, for those of you who don't work with adolescents or have adolescent children or contacts, it may be helpful to say something of that psychic state. The adolescent faces 4 tasks. First of all, separation from the parents and from unconscious identification with the parents. That is, separation in the external world and in the internal world. Secondly, finding a comfortable place in the peer group. That means facing comparisons of self and others and achieving a relatively objective view of themselves. Thirdly, coping with their own sexuality and that of others. And fourthly, starting by practical steps the road to an independent life. This all has to be done against a background of internal and external change, which all of you will know about and I needn't go into. Now, there are many myths, old ones and new ones, which attempt to describe these ordeals and ways through them. Fortunately, there are also a few facts, some of which were discovered by examining the myths more carefully. You've probably all got your favorite myth of adolescence, and perhaps if there's a discussion at the end, you'll share these with us. Obvious among the classical myths connected with adolescence are Narcissus and Echo. He couldn't let go of his earlier self-absorption and ultimately drowned in his own image. She couldn't express herself to him except by echoing him, and she perished. There are hints here of not only of completely blocked development, but also of sibling rivalries, and possibly penis envy, if one wants to bring Freud in. Another myth, Persephone, Demeter, and Hades. Now here there's some progress made by means of a split, and Persephone spends 3/4 of the year with her mother, in reality, and the other quarter in a hidden, dark sexuality. If we move on to Theseus and the Minotaur, here the young people, by allying with each other and actually making a relationship, are able to defeat parental destructive power, only to face later dangers, of course. Then there are the fairy stories. There's the Ugly Duckling, if you recall that one, in which you can see confusion about self, denial of one's own reality, and a suicidal impulse at the end when he approaches the swans in order to be killed. And it's all based on atypical mothering. Dr. Zinken, who spoke to you either last lecture, if any of you were there, might call this malignant mirroring. There's Rapunzel, an upside-down version of Persephone. In this one, it's the witch mother who imprisons the girl and entraps the youth. Moving on to Hans Andersen, a great favorite of mine, who's more complex still. Here, not only is the boy stolen and taken away into a narcissistic, sterile dream, but also his view of the ordinary beauty in the world is poisoned at source by the splinter from the Snow Queen's mirror. Then there are the Celtic myths. Diarmid and Gráinne, fleeing from Finn, a terrifying father figure. Deirdre and the three sons of Usnech, fleeing from Connor. The wild swans, trapped in childhood and exile by a wicked stepmother and a neglectful father. Celtic ones always seem to end in tragedy. As Chesterton said, all their wars are merry and all their songs are sad. Incidentally, of note, a Celtic practice in medieval or pre-medieval times was to foster out the sons of the nobility at puberty. Why? To force them into a wider peer group? To prevent incest? To prevent open rivalry with father? Modern myths tend to be less exciting, and it may be easier to see their provenance in wishful thinking, both good and bad. Margaret Mead's work, for example, Coming of Age in Samoa, suggested a real paradise for the young where conflict didn't occur. It has, in recent years, been questioned, or the research it's based on. The alternative idea, of course, is that all adolescents are inevitably disturbed, and that's been challenged in this country by Professor Rutter's work from Maudsley, and in the States by Offer's work. So where are we with so-called facts? There seem to be two theories worth pursuing. There's a theory of continuity, good, and the theory of discontinuity, bad. The first theory is based on the idea that adolescents from conflict-free, intact families, if these exist, especially where societies are cohesive and simple, find it much easier to find a way into an adult niche without too much distress. The paradigm would be a rural community without extremes of natural tragedy, where increasingly mature children can move into more adult productive activity without strain, helping with indoor or outdoor tasks and artistic or creative roles. Obviously, this can be mirrored in a more sophisticated world where intellectual and cultured families can create a space for their young to develop intellectually along the family lines. One thinks of the Darwin family, who produced Fellows of the Royal Society in 3 successive generations. Highly impressive. The bad myth, the discontinuous myth, is of the inevitability of strain in adolescence if there is no continuous familial world broken by death or divorce of the parents, or no cultural continuity, emigrations, displacement, refugees, and finally the impact of new technologies on the young. Now, the 2 children I mentioned before, both born in this country, nevertheless, their parents were immigrants. The impact of new technology on the young is no new idea. It has been hypothesized in the past. The actual phrase has been written, reading created childhood. The idea being that once adults could read and children couldn't, there were things that children couldn't know. Now, a long time ago, I remember writing some paper in which I, for some reason, looked up the child-rearing practices in the Bushman culture in Australia. I think I thought at the time that this would be a nice, simple, straightforward example of a culture where the children grew straight into the adult culture, given information, as it was necessary, and therefore becoming part of a tribe. Only to discover that in the Bushman culture, it was the practice of the elders to keep some information to themselves, which the young were not told, so it doesn't all depend on reading. And there's obviously a rivalry between the generations. Nowadays, of course, television and video have ensured that children can know everything, in the sense of having seen everything, if the parents allow them. And Elkind in the States has suggested that parents who are stressed and dropping behind because of rapid technological changes feel afraid, insecure, and lonely, so they have less energy to look after their children in the years when these are adolescent. It all sounds pretty plausible, especially the bit about parents being tired. Unfortunately, however, the research surveys don't bear these theories out. Surveys in the United States and over here have shown that only about 20 to 30% of adolescents present external difficulties, and prove troubled and troublesome. The rest get by. Though it should be said that Professor Rutter's work in this country, particularly in the Isle of Wight study, where they studied all the children up to the age of 16 on the island, showed that even though, as judged by parents' reports and questionnaires given to teachers, many adolescents were not troubled at all, the subjective reports from the youngsters themselves suggested that internally they were in a degree of turmoil. Perhaps man is born to trouble as the sparks fly upward. But even so, our aim should be to cut down trouble if we can. To come back to the word discontinuity, it's this aspect which signifies with the title of my talk, the recurrent phenomenon of adolescence. This is the theme of experience as a spiral, in which one comes back to the same place but slightly moved on. But with ill luck, this spiral may turn into a circular trap. Facing any new experience at any age, whether the new is a perception, an insight into a part of oneself, an external relationship, or a cultural experience, a regression to an adolescent state with typical adolescent offenses may occur. This is, of course, more likely if the original adolescent difficulties haven't been understood or worked through, or where the new experience is faced without support. This, of course, happened to the parents of both the youngsters that I've described for you. Events such as moving from one country to another, from the single state into the married state, the birth of a child, all disintegrate previous stable patterns. Divorce, bereavement, loss of employment, finally the inevitability of death can also create more or less unwelcome confrontations with an inner world previously successfully repressed. Again, the defenses are likely to include withdrawal, confusion, attempts at denial, and the degree of externally evident disturbance will vary, depending on the strength of the ego, and also, of course, depending on the capacity of the individual surrounding the troubled person to notice what's happening. So continuity, discontinuity. There should be a third word with relevance here somewhere. Something like recovery, retrieval, restoration, which would describe what happens when an individual who's threatened by breakdown is lucky enough to meet an external experience which restores the early good or creates a fresh, stable state. A sort of typical one is falling in love at any age, or perhaps even better in some ways, lasting new friendships which develop new parts of the individual, or even, shall we say, an extended therapeutic encounter, for example, analysis. In no way will any of these experiences completely avoid the pain of change, but they can make the pain worthwhile. T.S. Eliot in Ash Wednesday describes it beautifully when he writes of redeeming the time, restoring through a bright cloud of tears the years. This sort of change involves perceiving lost aspects of oneself, which perhaps until now have been projected into others and only recognized as, Katrina says, what everybody else has, not what one has oneself. It may be the elements are actually even despised and projected into bad people in the outside world. There's a poem by Charles Williams which touches on this theme. It's about a fancy dress ball where the guests had to attend dressed as somebody they knew. The poem puts it their other selves. This is what he's calling the disguises, their other selves. Makes it clear that these are recovered projections, assimilated opposites, disowned by, split off, and seen as qualities, again, as Katrina says, possessed by somebody else. I'll quote a bit of it. This guest his mother's courage wore, that his wife's zeal, while just before she in his steady patience shone. There a young love had put on the fine integrity of sense his mistress used. Magnificence a father borrowed from a son, who was not there ashamed to don his father's wise economy. No he or she was he or she merely. No single being dared, except the angels of the guard, come without other kind of dress. And yet those very robes were shown when from preserval as his own, into another's glory given, bright ambiguities of heaven. The ending in the poem is actually a little sad. The particular guest the poem is about didn't want to change and wouldn't accept other people's qualities and wouldn't withdraw his projections. So the end of the poem is, courteous as such beings are, the angel showed him to his car. Now, I've talked a little bit as if the task of adolescents and of others at different stages of life in similar kinds of breakdown was just to recover lost bits of themselves which they were seeing, like Katrina, in other people. But in fact, in both the children I've mentioned, there is an initial obstacle in the way, which is how they can separate themselves from the internal parents. The thing that is depressing Katrina is a mixture of her father's despair at only having girl children. And this is what she has picked up in his greeting when he comes into the house and calls wife and children, hello girls. It sounds an innocent greeting, it even sounds a friendly greeting, but she's picked up the collective depression in it. She can't therefore please her father. There's no way that she can get near enough to him to try. Her mother, on the other hand, left her country in order to escape a life of drudgery. Married somebody who would take her to a new country in which she saw things opening out for her, only to end up not only doing her own housework, as she would have had to do in her own country, but other people's housework as well. And as described by her daughter, she works a very hard day and then comes in the evening to a household where there's chaos, and nobody, least of all her eldest daughter, is going to help to clear up the chaos, because she has also internalized her mother's disgust for housework and feminism and rejection of the female role, even though she acts it out. And recently there was a really enormous upheaval in the household which brought in the neighbors, and it all boiled down to the fact that father had spilt some water on the floor while getting himself a glass of water from the sink and hadn't cleared it up. Neither had his eldest daughter, who immediately got extremely angry with him and stormed at him, making things worse. Mother came in to say, if you felt as bad as that about it, why didn't you clear it up? But the child can't clear it up, because in fact internally what her mother doesn't feel is that people should clear up these messes after men. So she's completely stuck. Can't help either parent. So before we get her into the next stage of seeing that all the qualities everybody else has, she has herself, we have somehow to detach her from trying to live out these impossible roles that she has internalized from the parents. It is, in her case, made more difficult by the fact that there was an early separation for some time. And the whole family only get really happy when they go back, when they regress completely back to from where they came, which they see as more safe. The other child also is stuck, much though she is different from Katrina, and she rejects her parents overtly and calls them trash, as she calls everybody else. But in fact, her rather ambitious and materialistic her strivings are part of a family myth that there were plantations and great wealth in the country that they came from. And in some way she's trying to live up to that still, without taking the practical steps to achieve it, but she's nearer it than my other adolescent. So the problem for these youngsters, as for many people when they find themselves caught in the circular trap and no longer on the spiral, is to sort out the elements that they have introjected, which are foreign to them, but are part of hereditary experience, and even can go back to a collective unconscious, and to retrieve the bits of themselves that they have disowned, split off, and can only see in everybody else. Well, that's where I want to leave it, really, for discussion or questions. Particularly, I wanted to come back to ask if in the audience there were any people who had got their own myths, either from the classics or from their own cultures, which would pertain to this experience of trying to reach a new stage in life.